Well, hello, this is Fake Zappa with another reading of the real Frank Zappa book. And as you can see, I'm here in my other part of my trailer here. And it is now March of 2022, and I'm eating some kind of ridiculous cheese and kale. I think it's kale. Yay. I was just thinking about this thing here. A song about vegetables. They keep you regular, they're real good for you. So, anyways, this is my Bible. It has what I believe I have. It's who it says I am. Everybody says amen. That's just another one of my bad impressions of Joel Osteen. And I have related this book so much to my past experience as a born-again Bible-believing Christian for almost 20 years of my life. And as an adult, who was introduced to that stuff as an adult. And that Bible had brought me a lot of hope and comfort and all this, and helped me explain a lot of things in the world until it started harming my mental health. And you'll see that a lot in the Frank Zappa book. Is one of his favorite quotes is, "That's bad mental health." and so yeah, the Bible was bad for my mental health, and it's been over 8 years since I decided not to follow the Old Testament and the New Testament. And so, speaking of Bible, I spent 4 hours with a political conservative who I enjoy hanging out with liberals as much as I do conservatives. And oddly, the conservatives, just because I can identify them, I can identify with them more than most left-wing people can. And I think that's one of the reasons why they actually listen to me. And it's really trippy. But born-again Bible-believing Christians have a very unpractical sense of the word conservative. And if there was one thing that Frank Zappa was not, it was a Republican. So, even though he identified as a conservative, there are some folks that talk about this fiscal conservative and things like that that might not necessarily mean that they want the family-friendly police of, moral legislation and that kind of stuff. And that's some of the stuff that Frank Zappa warned about. In fact, he would say it on TV to some of these, Crossfire, and some of this stuff that he would tell these people about a fascist theocracy. And yeah, the Bible folks are still getting a lot of people elected, because I know in this part of the country is more of a theocracy than anywhere I've lived in a long time. Well, it's weird to be in the land of the free and to have a lot of God all over stuff that has to do with state government type stuff. So anyways, I like this picture here. I like how this cartoonist does Frank Zappa, and he makes him look chubby, because me as fake Zappa is 225 pounds, and that's almost 100 pounds more than Frank Zappa was. I don't know how much he weighed, but most of the time I see him, especially in the 60s and 70s, I swear he's about 120 pounds. He probably wasn't that light when he wrote this book. But anyways, Star Wars, Nuclear umbrella, our price, 3 trillion big ones. And this was over 30 years ago. I like this. Them and us. Please, someone build your factory here. This is a reference to Frank Zappa also getting on the media outlets. One, I think, was a radio call-in show that he did around the late 80s, and folks were asking Frank Zappa questions about doing business in the what was still the Soviet Union. And they were predicting this stuff as well, you know, acting like, hey, this wall's going to come down. You know, we might as well try to do business and try. And then Frank's like, dude, if you have these things built in the Soviet Union and hiring their labor, which is less expensive, and then it's less shipping and all this kind of, he was really trying to get these people to think outside the box. And so I don't like people talking about Frank Zappa as a rock and roll guitar player and a comedian. That was kind of what some of the biggest ways he made money was to do that, to support his activism, which was making change not only in this country but overseas. And he uses a lot of big words that I don't know. That's why I think this guy, this Peter Oceanogrosonogonogo guy, probably took out a lot of Frank's big words, and he puts words in there that I like to read. And Zappa was not only a brilliant self-taught orchestral composer and all this kind of stuff, he was a self-taught sociologist, and he was self-taught in political science. And I don't know if he ever had any formal education or at least a degree in any of this stuff. And so, you know, he shouldn't have died. The American healthcare system is what killed him. Just imagine if there was an alternate universe where America had healthcare for celebrities and poor people, of course, but still, though, somebody who was already a household name was getting that poor healthcare service. I mean, that poor of an attempt at preserving his life. And professional entertainers and stuff have a lot of stress, and he had a lot of stress considering how everybody got in his way, not only to start his career and start his recording studio, but it happened his entire life. That's why I just don't see him as a rock and roll guitar player, comedy music. And very, very rarely will people cite Frank Zappa as anything else but somebody who was a funny guy on TV, or a funny guy in music, or that sat on a toilet naked. Chapter 17, page 315. About practical conservatism. Politically, I consider myself to be a, don't laugh, political conservative. I want smaller, less intrusive government and lower taxes. What? You too? Last tax session, I had a discussion with the wildly amusing Gary Icarus and the utterly fascinating Bob Kahn. Gary used to be the chief of the IRS audit division in Maryland and Washington, D.C., and Bob was one of the few decent Los Angeles attorneys. Gary was providing the laughs with a recitation of Reagan's description of our new tax laws. Equity, simplicity, and fairness. Come, let us experience the curious warmth of Irish humor. Okay, the time it takes for you to prepare your return. I don't know if I want to get into all this, but let's just say, okay, Form 1040, 3 hours, 7 minutes of record keeping, learning about the law, 2 hours and 28 minutes, preparing the form, 3 hours and 7 minutes, copying, assembling, and sending to the IRS, 35 minutes, unless you use TurboTax. So, minus 30 minutes of that. And then, okay, the Schedule SE 1040, the short form, 20 minutes of record keeping, 11 minutes of learning, 13 minutes of preparing, and 14 minutes of all the other shit there. And that is from the Department of Treasury, Internal Revenue Service. This eventually led to a discussion of a paper Gary wrote in college about what would happen if the U.S. income tax were removed and replaced with a national sales tax on all goods and services. Here's a few points he made. My paraphrasing. 1. We'd save a fortune on yearly budget of the tax IRS budget of the IRS itself. The sales tax would be administered with approximately 5% of the current IRS staff. 2, because people would be taxed only when they spent money, the entire economy would get a boost as people received more of an incentive to earn money. 3, certain folks who always seem to be avoiding paying taxes, defense contractors and church-owned businesses, for example, would be allowed to make a glowing debut as major stars of the U.S. tax base. Drug dealers don't file tax returns, but they spend money. As long as drugs are illegal, this is the only way to derive tax from them. They're from Los Angeles. See, 5. All of the cash in the subterranean economy would now be part of the tax base. I believe we are entitled to the beliefs of large-scale services which only the federal government can provide. National defense, Social Security, high-ticket research, help for the homeless, etc. Only so long as we are willing and able to pay for them. However, if such services are requested and rendered, it should be the goal and the responsibility of the government to make the deal work at a bargain price with the least amount of fuss, not with the largest amount of paperwork, the highest payroll, the endless, insufferable lawyers of bureaucracy. Efficient federal government should present social policy choices to the electorate in clear language. If you want these services, it will cost this much. Are you sure you want them now? Here is a list of ways that they can be paid for. Choose one. If you say you want these services, we'll take care of it for you. If you say no, next case. That's right, folks. Utopia! If we know we want services on a national scale, and if we know how to pay for them somehow, who'd object to this plan? Answer. Many of the people who claim to be conservative today, especially the ones who seem eager to turn America into a place where morality is dictated by religious dogma, certified by bizarre judicial decisions, legislated by semantic tyranny. Ever try to read the California ballot? maintained by emergency police measures and occasionally implemented by selective enforcement of the tax code. These not so conservative, in fact, extremely radical varmints prefer to keep the IRS just the way it is and don't mind paying a little extra to have it available as a tool for political extortion. By the way, have you ever wondered what the specific mission of the Internal Revenue Service is? Here's the 1964 version, still in effect for over 30 years, and maybe it still is. I haven't Googled that. The statement of some principles of the Internal Revenue Tax Administration. And this was, okay, here. The function of the Internal Revenue Service is to administer the Internal Revenue Code. Tax policy for raising revenue is determined by Congress. With this in mind, it is the duty of the service to carry out that policy by correctly applying the laws enacted by Congress, to determine the reasonable meaning of various code provisions in light of the congregational purpose in enacting them, and to perform this work in a fair and impartial manner with neither a government nor a taxpayer point of view. At the heart of administration is interpretation of the code. It is the responsibility of each person in the service charged with the duty of interpreting the law. Try to find the true meaning of the statutory provision and not to adopt a strained construction and belief that he is protecting the revenue. The revenue is properly protected only when we ascertain and apply the true meaning of the statute. The service also has the responsibility of applying and administering the law in a reasonable, practical manner. Issues should only be raised by examining officers when they have merit, never arbitrarily or for trading purposes. At the same time, the examining officer should never hesitate to raise a memorious issue. It also is important that care be exercised not to raise an issue or to ask a court to adopt a position inconsistent with the established service position. Administration should be both reasonable and vigorous. It should be conducted with as little delay as possible and with great courtesy and considerateness. It should never try to overreach and should be reasonable within the bounds of the law of and sound administration. It should, however, be vigorous in requiring compliance with law, and it should be relentless in its attack on unreal tax devices and fraud. The IRS, the Internal Revenue Cumulative Bulletin there, 1964. Page 318, the color of money. Even if we leave the IRS alone, there is a world of delinquent payments waiting to be collected. In order to identify the taxable dollars from drug dealing and other unreported income, it has been suggested that we change the color of our currency. Nothing green would be legal tender anymore. The government would trade everybody straight across. At the point of the coupon exchange, Mr. Taxman gets a good squint at your cash flow and bills you accordingly. Personally, I'd rather dump the federal income tax. National defense. If you own something, you will fight to protect it. If you don't, who gives a shit? The strongest defense any nation can have is a robust economy. What is that? Have we ever really seen one? The trickle-downers think it's robust when the guys in the Fortune 500 clean up. A nation is really strong when everybody's got a piece of action. Everybody. We have been criminalized by our own tax code. 97% of the population has to chisel and scam to survive. This is not robust. Are we too stupid to create a real national defense? Thanks to our schools and political leadership, the U.S. has acquired an international reputation as the home of 250 million people dumb enough to buy the wacky wall walker. Let's face it, without us, everybody else who wants to sell stuff will be in big trouble. I missed the wacky wall walker. How did I miss that? Damn. Page 319. As long as we remain marginally literate, materially insatiable, and stupid enough to meager away our future to the point that we become completely impotent, we are covered by a strategic life insurance policy with the premiums willfully paid by our trading partners. It is only a slight exaggeration to suggest that what if the Russians were to launch a U.S. invasion, Japan would gladly provide battalions of ninjas to take care of the, quote, problem, end quote, for us. If we get blown away, who's buying next year's Toyotas? And the Russians, considering how badly we're doing these days, can we afford to nuke any nation willing to send spend $100 for a pair of Levi's? And what about all that Pepsi Nixon arranged to sell over there? Star Wars. Does anybody reading this book actually believe America is prepared for a conventional war with anybody? If trouble breaks out, what are we going to do? Whatever it is, unless the guy in the White House is a lunatic, it's not going to involve our fabulous and totally expensive nuclear arsenal. We are not going to have a big-ass Mondo nuclear war, period. Nuclear explosions under the Nevada desert, what the fuck are we testing for? We already know the shit blows up. We're building machinery for a war that is unlikely as it would be unwinnable, and in the process creating environmental side effects that defy contemplation. Defense money should be put into manpower and equipment appropriate to the kinds of conflicts we are really going to encounter in the next quarter century. The manpower should be dedicated, the equipment should be easy to operate and maintain, and the management of military assets should be streamlined. Page 320. Let's say we have to make some show of force. The most common scenarios involve small guerrilla or terrorist groups. Nuclear retaliation. It has been suggested by others that arsenal pork grenades would have been a better deterrent. Islamic martyrs are denied entrance to heaven if they show up at the gate smelling like a pig. Denial of the big payoff removes a certain cachet from acts of voluntary self-destruction. If we are to subtract that portion of defense budget dedicated to weapons we will never use, either because they could backfire on us or guys with U.S. high school diplomas are sort of unqualified to operate them, or maybe they never worked at all, But because they are provided jobs in some guy's home district for 5 years, Congress kept the contract going and applied to education, low-cost housing, and military R&D. We'd all be better off. But no! We spent blobs of money on a startup contract for SDI, the Strategic Defence Initiative, and Star Wars. Yeah, and find out later that the initial research reports that said it will work were falsified by omission. For those of us who are still stupid enough to desire ownership of the proprietary system, I suggest that it could have been paid for 15 minutes ago with about 10% of what this fiscally conservative administration has already spent on balloons, bunting, straw hats, confetti, and the rest of all the detritus required to make a narcoleptic pinhead look presidential for the last 8 years. SDI won't save us from nuclear suitcase bombs, poison gas, bioweapons, or cocaine smugglers. Oh, fuck you. You were too right about this shit. Okay. And it carries a $1 trillion price tag. Attention shoppers. Let's take the trillion, divide it by our by our total population, and pass the results of the arithmetic in cash, along with a bazooka and a box of grenades to every family in America. Given the choice between terminal taxation and this incentive program, I think most Americans would opt to defend themselves and their exciting new bank accounts against anything as unlikely as a full-scale Russian invasion. Oh, really? And this is 2022, by the way. 321. Central America, Washington, D.C., a city infested with statues and congressional blowboys who wish they were statues. Did these fine salesmen really think Nicaragua was a menace to our national security? Yeah. Then why the fuck did we hire an amateur army to look after our, quote, interests, end quote, down there? Wait a minute. What are our interests down there? We have just spent 8 years being governed by dorks who acted like building a wall around Texas to ward off the Sandinistas. You just talking about a wall around Texas, too. Where'd my underliner go? There it is. Okay. To ward off the Sandinistas marching up through Mexico could be a super bitchin' strategic idea. Unless we use another amateur army of illegal alien laborers, we couldn't even afford it. The Teamsters contract for hauling in the raw material could easily cripple the economy. If we expect to protect our legitimate business interest on foreign soil, we are going to have to develop a more efficient and appropriate tools for the job. These might include psychology, persuading the population of whatever country we're not getting along with this week that we are the good guys. If the Russians can do it to us, Think of what we could do to everybody else with a little help from Madison Avenue. Diplomacy. Making honest and enforceable deals and reliably living up to them. Economic strategy. Help their economies to grow. Don't just move in and rape the labor force. Besides, these developing nations could become important new customers. It'll take them a while to find out how cheesy our products actually are, and until they catch on or we learn how to build better stuff, we can pretend to be the greatest nation on earth for a few more years. And if necessary, pork spritzers or gunpowder, not plutonium or nerve gas. Page 322. South Africa. It is a strategic necessity as much as a moral one for the U.S. to see that apartheid is brought to an end. You say you don't care. It doesn't matter that much to you. No big deal. If no one is competing, black factions takes over, will you really sleep better knowing that whoever wins this inevitable intertribal war has an H-bomb? And how about the growing segment of white population marching around with a nouveau swastika flag, piling flowers on the local Hitler shrine, hoping to oust the existing government so they can have the bomb? Folks, pork cologne will not work on these people. The Middle East. It is absurd that people are dying over such a miserable piece of real estate. Israel has the right to exist, and the Palestinians are entitled to their own state. The land issue would have been settled long ago if it weren't for the religious fanatics on both sides, the misguided efforts of the U.S. Israel lobby, and the weakness and short-sightedness of several U.S. administrations and our old friends in the weapons business. Guys who live on yachts purchased with the proceeds of bullet sales tend to feel awkward and out of place in the unemployment line. This often leads them to ingenious forms of product promotion. Is it not a slight embarrassment that many of these gentlemen are of the American persuasion? Government in the new perfect America. I've said it before and I'll say it again. Politics is the entertainment branch of industry. C-SPAN's coverage of governmental proceedings is wonderful. Caution, buffoons on the hill, wallowing in blabber and spew. Regiments of ex-lawyers and used car salesmen attempt to distract us from the naughty little surprises served up by deregulated corporate America. Has it become impossible to govern the U.S. by reason or logic? America under Reagan saw the rise of governance by trickery, fear, disinformation, and superstition. Oh, Jesus! Here come those fucking balloons again! Nazis' war on drugs! Speaking of superstition and balloons, let's examine the U.S. drug policy. Once upon a time, we had a stupid law called prohibition, based on the notion that alcohol was immoral, chemical compound. Instead of saving the national soul from demon rum, This policy was directly responsible for hundreds, perhaps thousands of innocent people being murdered in gang wars or poisoned by severely unripened beverages. Prohibition also made it possible for organized crime to develop and thrive on a scale never imagined by any of the legislation's sponsors. We have detected any similarity to the late 80s America yet, illuminated by the rosy glow of $1 trillion global drug business. Our covert war in Nicaragua looks like a badly directed snuff film shot on location in a cocaine money laundry. There has always been a symbolistic relationship between right-wing administration and purveyors of sinful goods. As long as the moralizers control the government and the purveyors' products remain officially forbidden, this keeps the price up and inflates their profits. A perverse system of international agricultural price supports. Would we really be surprised to discover that triple rinsed cocoa bucks have financed the Republican campaigns at levels for years? Alcohol prohibition gave us Elliot Ness. Drug prohibition gives us Nancy Reagan, George Bush, Manuel Noriega, Oliver North, the jolly lads at the Medellin cartel, and of course their local distributors over the schoolyard. Alcohol prohibition introduced us to the thrilling exploits of wise guy gangsters supplying the entertainment needs of a booze-guzzling public held hostage by a truly stupid piece of legislation. They dressed sharp, threw parties, greased City Hall, and had enough money left over at the end of the day to buy a few unions and build Las Vegas. Prohibition today has produced cartels of international party boys who take in enough cash daily to finance the LBO of any corporation on the planet. Darling, every crystal that crawled up your nose, at least since January of 1980, has helped to create economic power base for a worldwide secret government. Suicide. The reasons why people opt for dubious thrill of controlled substance consumption vary from one factor seems consistent at all social levels. In spite of the obvious physical risks, people will consume them no matter what. Party chemicals, including alcohol, are usually consumed because Mr. Party Guy wants to achieve some variation on a new condition we'll call bloato. For some, this amounts to a slow death, and they still want to do it. Suicide, fast or slow. Should any government have the right to force an adult to stay alive if that individual chooses death, fast or slow? In some instances, perhaps. Generally not. I believe that people have a right to decide their own destinies. People own themselves. I also achieve that in a democracy. Government exists because and only so long as individual citizens give it a temporary license to exist in exchange for a promise that it will behave itself. In a democracy, you own the government. It doesn't own you. Along with this comes a responsibility to ensure that individual actions in the pursuit of a personal destiny do not threaten the well-being of others, while in pursuit is in the progress. A matter of semantics. It disturbs me to hear news reports describing the menace of drugs, sandwiched between commercials for over-the-shelf painkillers, sleep inducers, diet capsules, and beer. Any societal menace involved would be more accurately cataloged as a substance abuse behavior, a generic term to describe any chemically introduced irresponsible conduct, whether derived from glue, nutmeg, dietary supplements, alcohol, or the current list of compounds on the controlled substances list. A drug is neither moral or immoral. It is a chemical compound. The compound in itself is not a menace to society until a human being treats it as if consumption bestowed a temporary license to act like an asshole. There are many compounds which chemically alter human behavior. They pose individual health risks and risks to the safety of third parties who might depend on the unimparted competence of the user who is piloting a 747, performing open heart surgery, judging a murder trial, or writing federal legislation. The fact is, no complete psychopharmaceutical behavioral table exists for the multitude of substances, controlled or otherwise, which humans might ingest, even accidentally, including foodstuffs which could, based on an individual's body chemistry, produce hallucinations, psychotic episodes, or any number of undesirable physical conditions leading them to impaired behavior. But for some reason, we have fixated on drugs. The, quote, drug problem, end quote, is real, but it has been muddled by bad semantics. If we could eradicate every compound on the controlled substances list tomorrow, the, quote, criminal, end quote, acts resulting from chemically altered states of the human behavior, if we assume that people are basically well-intended animals, and only get weird when alien molecules attack them, we should, would still continue. Life could be described as a complex form of electrochemical entertainment. Electrical charges modifying chemical compounds which recombine to make electrical charges with etc., 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 eventually leading to a life as a behavioral theater with performances perceived via electrochemical sensors which create charges, modify compounds, create more charges, and so on. Still with me? In short, even when before we had LSD, there were mushrooms, and even before PCC, we had maniacs, robbers, and murderers. Can we win any, quote, war on drugs, end quote? Are you kidding? The biggest danger from the drug trade is not the occasional lethal blunders committed by users and street dealers. The real evils lurk in the financial and political power which flows upstream to the cartels, to the cartels' overlords. These guys have enough loose cash to snatch up any chunk of any nation on a whim. U.S. drug users are financing the lower half of this equation, while our licensed representatives finance the rest by making life easy for the big guys with unforeseeable pseudo-legislation and a hilarious, inept war on drugs. What do you say when the U.S. Customs officers, asked to engage in vigorous interdiction, find it inconvenient to be tested for drug consumption themselves? Send in the Marines? Should we declare that a state of war exists between the U.S. and each drug-producing, drug-distributing, and/or money-laundering nation in order to legitimize the involvement of all military branches? What do we do about China? They have an H-bomb and a fairly large army. Oh well. Heroin's not that big a problem anymore. Let's just go after those bad cocaine dealers. Are we so seriously are we to seriously consider armed international conflict because middle-aged men in the entertainment community need illicit pharmaceutical assistance in order to keep their dicks hard? Are we going to roll out the leftover Agent Orange and fuck up somebody's jungle because creative people at the network rely on native medicine when making the complex aesthetic decisions which determine American television's financing content? Law and order. Part of what we have licensed the government to do is to maintain law and order. First, to create enforceable laws to provide an outline for the practical aspects of social existence, coupled with a license to use force if necessary in order to apply them. What the fuck went wrong? For one thing, we had a bumper crop of lawyers while back, and every one of them wanted to earn a living, but with so many lawyers competing for the criminal dollar, how could they expect to get their rightful hunk of the American pie? The answer was obvious. America needed more criminals with cash and equity. The lawyers of America set out to create a world where their services would be indispensable. They ouched into the governmental machinery at every level, and while we weren't looking, crafted a body of incomprehensible, contradictory, unforeseeable laws, the IRS code, for instance, which could be transgressed by anybody, anytime, without their even knowing it, thereby placing entire families in economically life-threatening situations unless they knew don't laugh, a good lawyer. Then the peculiarities of our case law system took over. Case law is what happens when a stupid judicial decision from one place gets cited as a legal precedent, forming the basis for another stupid judicial decision somewhere else, like a computer virus. Remember, in the beginning, we have this theoretical temporary license to the theoretical government to create this theoretically organized social system to be administered on a democratic basis, and part of the deal required that the license holder would create law for us and with it maintain order. It was supposed to be done by the guys who knew something and how to do it. I wanted to do it because we needed it. They said they could do it. We believed them. We voted for them. But what did it get? A mutant subspecies that tells lies for a living, unwittingly assisted by similar juries chosen by the lawyers themselves, who do the rest of the damage to the system by excreting mounds of case law. We could thin out the ranks of the legal profession a bit if we are required that everything lawyers and judges say in court be under oath with treble punishment and property confiscation penalties for them if they lie, or if any of the documents generated or used as evidence are found to be written forms of lies. Zero tolerance. The new drug law that mandates the death penalty and confiscation of property connected with any drug trafficking operation could lead to some intriguing conversations with Mrs. Thatcher. British offshore banking policy allows, even promotes practices which assist in the laundering of drug money. Of all the foreign governments involved in the current epidemic of LBOs and purchases of American assets, including the Arabs, the Germans, and the Japanese, Britain, or unknown entities acting through British banking agents, has grabbed the most. In many respects, the UK is well on its way to becoming a third world nation. Where the fuck are they getting all the cash to buy us up? It is an act of war to buy somebody's country out from underneath him. If somebody offers to buy your country, or what amounts to economic control of your country, and you sell it to him, does that mean your country plans to go into retirement? What are we going to do? Take the cash and move to Switzerland? Other options. If we were to decriminalize and commercially recontrol the controlled substances, dispensing them in the rack next to the alcohol in state stores, or in chains of the federal party pharmacies, for example, benefits to the U.S. Treasury could be substantial, as would domestic cocaine brewery profits. At least one aspect of our agricultural problem would be solved. What should we plant next year, Wanda? The prison population would diminish, and most importantly, we could put a crimp in the pipeline for feeding cash to the guys in the jungle. I don't know about you, but I have never missed a temporarily licensed to govern to any guy in any jungle, but because they made so many friends in Washington during the last 8 years, just helping out with the war effort, they act as if it had been granted by proxy. Would recontrol put the cartels out of business? Probably not. What if RJR Nabisco decided to open a brewery division? Dan Dorfman would report rumors of another big takeover. The stock would soar. A lot of church and pension fund buying, and the cartel would wind up as a legit U.S. business, just like some of our most illustrious old money families who hit it big when the booze trade got redignified. What if a kinder, gentler CIA chose to produce a low-cost designer drug with a special social engineering characteristics and mount yet another covert civilian test for profit, arranging for this new buzz to drive traditional flavors out of the marketplace. It worked with LSD. Oh, and doesn't PCP makes you crazy? Takes 5 guys to hold you down, etc. Have a sort of militarily useful aura about it. Like this. The cobwebs on the hammer and sickle. Communism! Mr. Gorbachev has apparently stumbled into one of the best kept secrets in Soviet history. Communism doesn't work. It's against the basic law of nature. People want to own stuff. Perestroika virtually certifies this as an axiom. You still want to call it communism? Sure, go ahead. Call it what you want. We don't need to say, I told you so. Leave a guy some dignity. In the Cold War, have another Pepsi. It makes you moonwalk. In exploring their philosophy, the Soviets employed a technique reminiscent of U.S. evangelical TV ministries. They told people who were hungry and sick that they'd give them food and penicillin. The evangelists forced them to read the Bible, and the communists made them read the Little Red Book. And if you couldn't read, the motherfuckers would recite it to you through a bullhorn. The Soviets have spent many years and a lot of money marketing and maintaining a political edsel fueled by the assumption that the entire populace will cheerfully endure Spartan conditions, then hand over the fruits of all labor to a benevolent bureaucracy which would redistribute the wealth of an equitable manner. What? In every language, the first word after mama that every kid learns to say is mine. A system that doesn't allow ownership, that doesn't allow you to say mine when you grow up, has to, put it mildly, a fatal design flaw. From the time Mr. Developing Nation was forced to read the Little Red Book in exchange for a blob of rice, till the time he figured out that waiting in line for a loaf of pumpernickel was boring as fuck, took about 3 generations. Television helped speed that cycle. Decades of indoctrination, manipulation, censorship, and KGB excursions haven't altered the fact people want a piece of their own little something or other, and if they don't get it, they have a tendency to initiate counter-oblivion, counter-revolution. Why then do so many Americans, while professing to adore freedom and democracy, support and even demand that actions be taken by their own government, which bear a striking resemblance to old-style evil empire communism, censorship, disinformation, the public library spy squealer program? Are we really that unspeakably stupid? Use it or lose it. Page 131. Americans like to talk about or be told about democracy, but when put to the test, usually find it to be an inconvenience. We have opted instead for an algorithm system disguised as a democracy. We pay through the nose for an enormous joke of a government, let it push us around, and then wonder how all those assholes got in there. Communism doesn't work because it is out of phase with human nature. Are we going to wake up one day and find this statement equally true when applied to the concept of Western democracy?